During a lesson a kid was fooling around and ended up getting a CRT TV dropped on his head. What's the scariest or saddest thing you ever dealt with or saw at school? An old school friend found his mother dead due to a heart attack in his bathroom. From one moment to another he was like a whole different person. He became very emotional, dropped out of school a few years later, began doing drugs, even went to jail. Hope he is doing better today. Kelsey Smith. She was a year ahead of me in high school. I didn't know her very well but had a couple classes with her and chatted maybe a handful of times. She was one of those people that pretty much everyone knew. Then one morning shortly after the end of the year my dad told me that some girl from school had gone missing. I did what any teenager in 2007 would have done and jumped on Facebook, and found a whole deluge of posts from my friends asking for any information about Kelsey. Then I remember I was in the airport with a bunch of school friends getting ready to go on a class trip to Germany when we saw on the news in the terminal that a body had been found. The final year of my high school, we graduate at 16 here, we were given the option to go on a ski trip somewhere in Italy. One of the teachers seduced and slept with a student on the trip and naturally being young and dumb, she fell in love with him and genuinely believed he loved her back. Then when we got back from the trip, he completely blanked her and broke her heart. She spent hours sobbing in the bathrooms and hallways. Nothing was done about it. Note, age of consent here is 16 too, so it wasn't illegal from a purely sexual standpoint, but he took on the role of a guardian on that trip and the power dynamic made it just as bad. Grew up in a pretty poor district. Got some that people would probably consider worse: vicious fights, Dr. G.S., guns, teacher on student violence and vice versa, but here's a couple that stick out. Scariest, high school. Kid assaulted a girl at a party. Following Monday her BF caught him in the parking lot. He beat and stomped him ruthlessly and actually imprinted a Nike swoosh in the kid's face. I saw the aftermath and that kid was a mess. His lips had somehow split and peeled back, exposing all the teeth on the left side of his face. Facial reconstruction for sure. No idea how he did after that day. Saddest, junior high. Kid was getting mercilessly picked on because he was wearing the same clothes for like the third or fourth day straight. Super quiet kid, didn't say anything back. We later found out he hadn't changed because his older brother, who was his only caretaker, had killed himself the prior weekend. This 7th grader was the only one left who knew, and he was so emotionally fucked he just silently carried on with school until a neighbor figured out something was wrong. Edit: Jesus, this got more attention than I expected. Some updates. BC questions keep coming. Assaulted kid from the first story transferred, but I don't know anything else. His attacker, who already had a record, was locked up. The girlfriend's assault was sexual but definitely stopped short of what most would call ARP. This kid had a track record of being a bit of a creep though. The kid from the second story was gone from school way before we found out what happened. I was in the class he was in and I know he was gone shortly after the week he was getting harassed. I don't know much more about anyone involved. I just happened to be walking back into the building right as story number 1's fight ended and only heard about the kid from number 2 through friends. I didn't witness any bullying, but I had a friend in the class with him when he was being harassed. Scariest was a routine hallway fight that went sideways. It was between two girls. Out of nowhere one of them pulls out a box cutter in the middle of the fight and gets a clean strike right across the other girl's face. The saddest was probably my neighbor. When she was in 5th grade, early middle school, she was trying to save up money for something, I don't remember what. Her parents were huge stoners, had enormous weed plants growing in their backyard. I could see them clear as day. One day she brought a gallon-sized bag full of weed to school and was planning on selling it to one of the older kids. The school found out and called the police. I remember coming home and watching them raid their house, taking out plant after plant. Both the girls ended up in foster care for a long while after that. Saddest, my junior year of high school. One of the students in my math class got shot and killed in a drive-by. Apparently, her ex-boyfriend was aiming at her new boyfriend and shot her instead. We didn't do anything in class for a whole week because everyone, even more so our teacher, was just really sad. Scariest: about 10 students from a rival high school close to ours, dressed in our school uniforms and trespassed on our campus during lunch and assaulted a group of our students that they had beef with. The administrators couldn't even stop them as this was more than just some spat or fight. Our students were getting beaten to a pulp. Eventually the cops came and arrested the other students and sent most of ours to the hospital. I remember seeing one of our administrators thrown into the air when he tried to get in between two of the guys. There was a severely disabled kid who had several physical and mental disabilities such as extra fingers and confined to a stroller. He had the mental capacity of an infant. Unable to make speech but incoherent noises. That kid always had a smile on and was gleeful and no one said anything bad about him. They'd read to him or greet him as his liaison would push him about. One day I saw an ambulance leaving, his liaison was crying and running to her car. He had gone into cardiac arrest and died upon arrival to the hospital. He was only 9. I was in special ed at the time and the hardest news to break to the more severe kids was our friend had passed away. The staff breaking the news to the kids. Sadly the school didn't do a day of mourning for him because the principal was tired of kids using them as excuses to skip class and fuck around. I still can hear my friend smiling making his loud cooing noise. It was my senior year in high school, and we were doing the last dress rehearsal for the school play. We had a special guest that night. It was our lead's grandmother. She had Alzheimer's and so couldn't handle a crowd, as she would have panic attacks, but she wanted to see her granddaughter in the play, up the down staircase if you're curious. I dimmed the lights in the auditorium, and the curtain went up. We started the background music, and everything looked good when I heard the director, teacher yell out, "Turn up the lights, goddammit." Teacher never raised his voice, and certainly never swore. I looked over the edge of the lighting booth and saw teacher pulling an elderly woman out of the seats onto the aisle. "What's going on?" said the stage manager into the radio, in my ear. "Send lead out, I think something is wrong." Lead came on stage, saw what was happening, and I swear to you, it's nearly 30 years later, and I can still hear her scream. It started off as unintelligible, but eventually we could hear her saying something to the extent of "No, please don't leave me," over and over again. Someone had run into the hallway where the payphone was, and called for an ambulance. I had aimed the spotlight onto the teacher and grandma so they could, hopefully, see better. Auditorium lights weren't that bright. The EMTs came quickly, loaded grandma up and took her to the hospital. Lead and the rest of her family followed. Needless to say, we didn't have dress rehearsal, and grandma passed away that night. The show still needed to go on the next day. Lead showed, performed phenomenally, and we made sure that grandma's seat was empty for every show. To this day, when any of us talk about it, we all agree that she was there, cheering us all on. When my 12-year-old fellow classmate passed away and they couldn't explain why, so they told us it was an accidental suicide. I understood what suicide meant, but the very nature of it meant there was intention behind it. Calling it accidental just confused the grief I was already experiencing. I'd already lost my grandparents within memory. I understood death. But having to go to class every day after for the rest of the year, where his desk used to be, where he used to be, leaving class afterwards, late because I was a slow mover, and him not being there anymore were hard. During roll call in high school, when someone wasn't there, and other kids would snicker and say "oh they died" was brutal. Because one day in the middle of the week there was an empty chair, and the boy that sat in it never came back. Teacher here, both are 7th grade. The scariest wasn't really scary but was more of a WTH type of thing. Kid got mad because the teacher wouldn't up his grade from failing to an ARB. Opened up the window, 2nd story. This was one of the few rooms without bars on the window, and, while maniacally laughing, threw books out of it. kept laughing, went to walk out of the room and pulled the door shut so hard that the glass in the door shattered. Walked down the hall laughing. The scariest non-WTH thing, student waited for a teacher and jumped her outside of the building after school one day. She didn't come back. Saddest, one of my brightest and happiest students was dealing with some family issues. Found out in the morning before school that his cousin had stabbed his aunt to death, 48 times or something ridiculous like that, and still had to come to school because his parents couldn't miss work and his aunt was basically his other mom. I remember him sitting in the cafeteria and absolutely bawling over it. During a lesson a kid was fooling around and ended up getting a CRT TV dropped on his head. We didn't see him for a few weeks after that. He would come back for a day or two then be sick. He died of a brain bleed in his sleep. That's the reason he was feeling sick. It would have been picked up quicker but his family were Jehovah's Witnesses and didn't take him to a hospital, just a GP. Not the usual. I was at the bottom of 2 flights of stairs in a large open hallway, so the stairs were an open style. Anyway, this kid, from the top, did the thing where he slid down the hand railing on his stomach. Flipped over the railing on accident, fell 2 stories, landed feet away from me. Sickening thud. He broke ribs, a leg, many teeth, partially collapsed lung. Concussion. He was back in school relatively quickly. I had my back to it, so I didn't see the landing. I think it was straight on his back. Lucky IMO wasn't on his head. Thank you for watching the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more quality content. Leave a comment if you have any suggestions. Goodbye.